wasn't looking for technological impossibilities when I started researching the 1900 Paris Exposition Universelle. I was examining photographs of late 19th century Paris, horse-drawn carriages navigating mud roads, gas lamps providing flickering light on street corners, a world that still relied on candlelight in most homes, a society supposedly just discovering basic electricity, when something stopped me cold. A photograph of the Palace of Electricity. Not a single building with primitive lights, an entire palace, glowing with millions of incandescent bulbs, generating more electrical power than the entire city of Paris itself. And this was 1900. This was a world where most people had never seen an electric light in their homes, where power distribution was experimental, where electrical systems were considered cutting-edge technology available only to the wealthy. How did they do it? Not the simple answer about generators and wiring. I understand those components. What I don't understand is how a civilization that traveled by horse, that worked by candlelight, that used ice boxes instead of refrigeration, somehow assembled the capability to create the most sophisticated electrical power generation system the world had ever seen. For a temporary exposition, built in less than 3 years, demolished immediately after closing. The deeper I looked, the more that simple explanation began to collapse under the weight of what these photographs actually show. Let me be specific about what these photographs depict. The 1900 Paris Exposition Universelle covered 547 acres along the Seine. In the Palace of Electricity alone generated 21,000 horsepower. To put that in context, that's more power than was available to the entire city of Paris at the time. Not just for lighting, for everything, for a single temporary building at a fair. The exposition featured over 83,000 exhibitors from 58 countries. 50 million visitors passed through the gates between April and November 1900. They witnessed something that shouldn't have been possible. The Rue de l'Avenir, the Street of the Future, a 3.5-kilometer electric moving platform, a moving sidewalk that transported visitors across the exposition grounds, 3.5 kilometers of synchronized electric motors, moving continuously for 7 months. In a world that supposedly was just discovering basic electricity, the Chateau d'Eau, a monumental fountain with comprehensive electric lighting, creating cascades of illuminated water. The Grand Palais, still standing today, built as a temporary structure with the permanence and architectural sophistication of ancient cathedrals. The Petit Palais, the Pont Alexandre III, structures of such massive scale and ornate detail that they seem impossible as temporary exhibition buildings. And here's the strangest part. The official explanation is that all this power came from temporary coal generators. Temporary facilities built specifically for the exposition, generating 21,000 horsepower for 7 months, then dismantled. Does that make sense to you? If you're just joining this investigation into what mainstream history refuses to address, hit subscribe, because what I'm about to show you raises questions that no one wants to answer. New episode daily uncovering the lost legacies buried beneath official narratives. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. The official history tells us the 1900 Paris Exposition showcased the latest technological achievements, that it demonstrated French engineering prowess. Watch that companies competed to display their electrical innovations. Fine, but consider the timeline. In 1900, Thomas Edison's power plants had existed for less than 20 years. The first commercial power station opened in 1882 in New York, serving 85 customers within 1 square mile. 18 years later, the Paris Exposition generated enough power to illuminate an entire city of light, not for permanent infrastructure, for a temporary fair. Consider what we're actually being asked to accept in an era when most Parisian homes use gas lighting or candles, when electric street lighting existed only on major boulevards, when power distribution was limited and unreliable. During this precise moment, organizers somehow assembled the resources, expertise, and an infrastructure to create power generation exceeding the capacity of the entire city. Not gradually developed over decades, built in less than 3 years, not for permanent use, for 7 months of operation, then dismantled and destroyed. Where did the expertise come from? The official answer is that electrical engineers designed the systems, that power companies installed generators, that everything proceeded according to modern engineering standards. But what modern standards? Power generation at this scale didn't exist in permanent installations yet. There was no template for electrical systems serving 50 million visitors, no proven methodology for 3.5 kilometers of synchronized electric motors running continuously. The Paris Exposition was supposedly pioneering technology that was still being developed, and yet it worked flawlessly, comprehensively, on a scale that permanent Parisian infrastructure wouldn't match for another 30 years. And that's where the phenomenon becomes impossible to ignore, because it wasn't just Paris. The 1893 Chicago World's Fair, 120,000 incandescent lamps creating the White City. The 1901 Pan American Exposition in Buffalo, 350,000 lights with comprehensive power distribution. The 1904 Louisiana Purchase Exposition in St. Louis, 100,000 arc lamps and incandescent bulbs. The 1915 Panama Pacific Exposition in San Francisco, 500,000 colored lights with sophisticated control systems. Every major exposition from 1889 to 1915, the same pattern. Temporary cities, electrical systems more sophisticated than permanent urban infrastructure, power generation exceeding what entire cities possessed. Then systematic demolition. But it wasn't just the scale, it was the sophistication. Look closely at photographs of the Palace of Electricity. We'll notice the architectural details, the ornate facades, the massive dome structures, the precision of the construction. These weren't simple temporary sheds housing generators. These were palaces, built with the permanence of cathedrals, using materials and techniques that suggest intended longevity. Why? Why build something so permanent, so monumental, so architecturally sophisticated for 7 months of operation? The official answer involves national pride, demonstrating French grandeur, creating lasting monuments to the Exposition. And yet, most of it was demolished. The Palace of Electricity, gone. The Chateau d'Eau, demolished. The temporary structures that generated power for an entire city of light, dismantled without comprehensive documentation. Only a few structures remain: the Grand Palais, the Petit Palais, and the Pont Alexandre III. The ones built with such obvious permanence that demolition would have been too difficult. The pattern repeats with unsettling precision. Build with impossible sophistication, operate flawlessly, demolish systematically, erase the technical details. Let me show you what else appears in these photographs. The architecture itself. Look at the roof lines of the Palace of Electricity. Notice the structures on top. Ornate metalwork extending upward. Formations that look like antennas, collectors, atmospheric energy receivers. Now, the official explanation is that these are purely decorative. Architectural flourishes in the Art Nouveau style, popular at the time. Maybe, but when you see similar structures on the Eiffel Tower, on the Grand Palais, on exhibition buildings across multiple expositions, the coincidence becomes harder to dismiss. What if these weren't decorations? What if they were functional? What if the Palace of Electricity wasn't generating power from coal, but collecting it from the atmosphere? I'm not claiming this is true. I'm asking, Anoma, does the photographic evidence allow for this possibility? Consider the scale of the humans in these photographs compared to the buildings. Tiny figures dwarfed by massive structures, not just tall buildings, but structures of such gargantuan proportion that they seem designed for a different purpose than housing temporary exhibitions. The doors are enormous. The halls are vast beyond any practical need. The architectural details are precise down to the smallest ornament. This level of construction requires years of work. Highly skilled craftsmen, massive resources. The official timeline says it was built in less than 3 years, from conception to completion, including the electrical systems that generated more power than the entire city of Paris. Does that timeline make sense to you? Because the more I examined the evidence, the more I realized I wasn't looking at a demonstration of developing technology. I was looking at something that appeared fully developed, sophisticated, mature, not experimental, not developmental, already perfected. Here's where we encounter what I call the inheritance problem. Let's accept for a moment that French engineers possessed the capability to build these systems, that they had the knowledge, the resources, the expertise. Fine. But that raises an even more troubling question. If they possessed this capability in 1900, why didn't Paris itself have comparable power infrastructure? Why did residential electrification in Paris proceed so slowly? Why did it take decades for the city to achieve electrical capacity comparable to what a temporary exposition demonstrated in 1900? The technology existed, the expertise existed, the manufacturing capability existed, but permanent implementation lagged behind temporary demonstration by 30 years. It's as if the exposition wasn't showcasing new technology, it was demonstrating inherited technology, capability that already existed. Systems that were being revealed, not invented. And once the demonstration was complete, once the world had seen what was possible, the structures were demolished. The technical documentation disappeared. The detailed engineering records were never preserved. We have thousands of photographs of the completed exposition. We have architectural drawings of the buildings themselves. We have visitor accounts describing the spectacle. We have newspaper reports praising French ingenuity. But try to find detailed specifications for the power generation systems. To try to locate maintenance logs showing how they kept 21,000 horsepower running continuously. Try to trace the supply chains for the materials and equipment. Try to find training records for the workers who built and operated these systems. Fragments exist, enough to construct an official narrative, but not enough to truly understand how it was done, not enough to replicate it, not enough to explain the discontinuity between what was demonstrated and what was implemented afterward. And this pattern, this specific pattern of demonstration followed by demolition, repeats across every major exposition. We remember the spectacle. We forget the mechanism. We preserve the photographs. We lose the technical documentation. We commemorate the achievement. We erase the process. It's as if these expositions weren't introducing new capability. They were revealing old capability, briefly demonstrating what was already known, what was already possible, and then closing the door again, returning to the official narrative of gradual technological development. Historical records mention other contexts where sophisticated technology appeared before it supposedly existed. Ancient accounts of temples with perpetual flames that never consume fuel. Medieval descriptions of illuminated structures without visible fire. Renaissance reports of power systems that defied contemporary understanding. Most historians dismiss these as myths, exaggerations, misunderstood natural phenomena. Maybe they're right, but after studying these exposition photographs, after examining the architectural sophistication, after seeing the pattern of capability followed by erasure, I'm less certain. What if the 1900 Paris Exposition wasn't pioneering new technology? What if it was demonstrating recovered technology? What if the Palace of Electricity wasn't generating power, but collecting it from a system that already existed? What if Paris wasn't building a new power grid, but temporarily activating an older, more advanced one? What if the exposition was revealing a lost legacy and then covering it up again? I'm not claiming this is true. I'm asking, does the evidence allow for this possibility? So we return to where we began, the 1900 Paris Exposition Universelle, a city of light that generated more power than Paris itself, built in less than 3 years, operated for 7 months, then demolished. How was this possible? Not the simple mechanical answer about coal generators and electrical wiring. I understand those components. What I don't understand is how a civilization that traveled by horse and worked by candlelight assembled the capability to generate 21,000 horsepower in temporary facilities. I don't understand why structures built with the permanence of cathedrals were demolished as if they were worthless. I don't understand the 3.5-kilometer moving sidewalk, the synchronized electric motors, the sophisticated power distribution, all supposedly built by a society just discovering electricity. I don't understand why Paris itself took 30 years to achieve what a temporary exposition demonstrated in 7 months. I don't understand the ornate structures on the roof lines that look like atmospheric collectors. I don't understand the massive scale, the architectural precision, the impossible timeline. I don't understand the systematic demolition. I don't understand the missing technical documentation. I don't understand the silence, the lack of serious historical inquiry into these discontinuities, the acceptance of an official narrative that doesn't account for what the photographs actually show. And most of all, I don't understand this. Was the Paris Exposition truly built in a few years? Or was Paris inheriting an older, more advanced power grid, temporarily activating it for the world to see, and then shutting it down again? The photographs remain. They're not hidden, not suppressed. They're in archives, available for anyone who wants to examine them. Images of a palace of electricity that generated impossible power. Images of moving sidewalks that shouldn't have existed yet. Images of structures too permanent to be temporary, too sophisticated to be primitive. And then they vanished, most demolished, the technical details erased, leaving only the photographs and questions. Questions about what we knew and forgot. Questions about what we built and destroyed. Questions about the knowledge that briefly surfaced in these palaces of light and then receded back into shadow. I don't know what the Paris Exposition really was. I don't know if it represents lost technology, inherited infrastructure, or simply a moment when ambition exceeded explanation. But I know this, the official narrative that this was simply a showcase for developing electrical technology is incomplete. It doesn't account for the scale, the sophistication, the impossible timeline, the systematic demolition, the missing documentation. Something else was happening in that city of light, something we've chosen to forget, or something we've been encouraged not to remember. The photographs preserve the light, but the knowledge that produced it, that remains in darkness. And perhaps that's where it was always meant to stay.